The Popovs. Those circular demonic little hell spawns that everyone laughs at for their lack of hydrodynamics. You know them, I know them, your mum probably knows them, your dad definitely knows them, and your sister, well, she has a social life so she doesn't know them. They are the twins, the dynamic duo of tilting your head to the side and looking confused with a half-open jaw while you matter, but why? But what you may not realise, well, unless you listen to the collab I did with History Everything podcast on Spotify, is that there was in fact another. A third sister, if you will. And this sister was a bit more special, a bit fancier, if you will. The kind of sister that wears only gold and diamonds and does not have time for such frivolous things as making sure the average subject is not treated like a slave. The circular royal yacht, Livadia. Oh wait, look, it's that thing. Yes, that's right, this video is sponsored by none other than NordVPN. Now, I got a lot of time for VPNs, in particular with the work that I do. Getting you these videos quite often takes me to some less than savoury places on the internet, and Nord here, with their security features, makes visiting sites, such as ones that ended two-letter .r somethings that I'm not going to say, just that much easier and safer. On top of that, if you're travelling or out in public, don't ever join public Wi-Fi networks, unless you can first flick on a VPN, and then you are far, far safer from getting your IP grabbed. Nord is something that allows you to do that. My favourite feature of Nord above all, though, is that it lets me watch cricket and Australian sport wherever I am. Yes, that includes Kharkiv, where I was able to watch the Australian cricket team play without any interruption. And, LP can swear for this, I watched the Australian Rugby League State of Origin in Kyiv at 10 AM in the morning by flicking on my VPN. Click the link in the description or the pinned comment to get a discount on your future Nord membership. And one new thing I want to highlight with Nord too, and they haven't asked me to do this, but I want to add it as well because it's really important and something I've noticed, is the new fake shop detection feature that they have. Now, as somebody who does most of their shopping online and running my own business, fake shops are getting harder and harder to spot. With Nord though, you can be assured that your purchases are safe. So check the link in the description and the pinned comment. For those who don't want to check there, the link is nordvpn.com/history of. That again, nordvpn.com/history of. You get a bit of a discount and there's 4 months free on any 2-year plan and a 30-day guarantee. That's just again, the link, nordvpn.com/history of. And without further ado, roll the music. Now, to preface, this is not the first Livadia, so if you go googling you may get a little confused as to what I'm about to tell you when you click on Livadia 1873 versus Livadia 1880. Notice how close they are in time periods. But to give you a little rundown of where the name came from, it was originally the name for the Livadia Palace in Crimea, the summer residence of the Tsar and his family, originally a much smaller, well by Romanov standards, hidey hole, where the family would bugger off to in the summer to get away from the stinky masses in St. Petersburg. The palace that stands there today is a little different, built in 1909, and is now more famous for being both the refuge of the Dowager Empress in 1919 before her rescue by HMS Marlborough, but later, of course, this was the location of the famed Yalta Conference in 1945 that betrayed the Poles in Eastern Europe to the Kremlin. You know, the Kremlin that helped the Nazis start World War II. I mean, what? Anyway, the first Livadia was built in 1873 as a royal yacht, as a replacement for the smaller royal yacht Tiger on the Black Sea. She was laid down in 1869 as the Black Sea counterpart of another larger royal yacht because of, yes, of course they needed two for different oceans. Of course they did. Why? Shocking that that royal family got murdered, right? And in 1873 the ship put to sea. The ship would make exactly one voyage with the Romanovs from Sevastopol to Yalta, which is basically nothing, before being used as a training ship and then being converted into an auxiliary cruiser to fight the Turks. The first Livadia would actually perform decently at war, for a royal yacht that is, and would sink a Turkish schooner in 1877. This bit of luck soon came to an end though because, well, it's the Russian Navy, and for reasons unknown to us, the captain chucked a hissy fit one day and demanded in 1878 to sail into a storm to go to Odessa. Shockingly, sailing into a storm next to land is bad, and in short order the ship was thrown onto the rocks and battered into oblivion, because of course it was. Not missing the beat, the Romanovs had another royal yacht ordered literally under a year later from England. You know, because royal yachts that you barely go on are the most important thing in the world, not, you know, making sure your population has things like food. Whatever. But it was here that the Romanovs and, well, the Russian Navy as a whole decided to get a little jiggy and a little fancy with it, to test a bit of new technology for the next generation of super mega battleships. What, you thought Wunderwaffe was a thing that the Nazis only made? Oh no. They were going to make this one around. In many ways, the Popovs can trace their lineage to the Scotsman John Eldar, who published an article stating that the ships in future would need to be wider and shorter to best make use of armour and the weight of new guns and turrets. Eldar argued that this would then require the ships to have a sharper, deeper hull to ensure speed and stability, and the leading British naval architects of the day, the best in the world, largely agreed. And we could see some influence here in the fact that British ironclads and later, pre-dreadnoughts were shorter and stubbier. Rear Admiral Popov in Russia, though, well, he decided that he would read the title and not the reasoning behind it, at least that's my guess, because he concocted from the depths of hell the idea of a completely circular ship, with a flat bottom, we'll get to that, and just it's a floating circle. It's not shorter and stubbier, it's a circle. You've gone too far and you're on the other end of the horseshoe, Popov. Now, a lot has been said about these ships, and there is some truth to the rumours that they were crap. What is true is that as coastal defence ships, which was their whole point, they were very well armoured and armed, and effectively fantastic floating gun batteries. Their size and shape meant that they were incredibly stable as gun platforms. However, they were slow. Their shape not at all hydrodynamic, and they were horrific at handling currents. They couldn't turn well, some of their propellers were useless, and what Popov had effectively built was an amazing floating barge. They also couldn't handle waves, but we'll get into that. The effectiveness of these ships as monitors, though, ignoring most of their faults, did make Admiral Popov quite famous, and like all true political animals, he used this influential position to convince everyone that the solution to the apparent need for another royal yacht could be solved by building an even bigger circular ship. Initially, the plan was to be a little sensible, and make the royal yacht that wasn't as extravagant or as insane, but Popov threw his full weight behind the project and in his plans. Well, he insisted that the royal yacht should be wide while also maintaining a speed of 14 knots. The final design was a whopping 71 metres long, and get this, 46.64 metres wide. You could play grade cricket on this thing. This ship was so big it was more of an oval than a circle. To add to her beauty, if you want to call it that, she was given a clipper bow and a 33 metre wide superstructure with 3 glorious funnels stacked side by side. For safety purposes, the hull was split into at least 40 different watertight compartments, with the boilers and the engines and the electrics housed in multiple separate compartments to ensure that the ship could survive flooding. It'll need those, but we'll get into that. Interestingly, there were 40 compartments wrapping around the hull, forming a frame, what could be seen as a possible inspiration for future torpedo bulges, and indeed it would affect future naval design. Popov, as the kids say, was absolutely cooking with this thing, but to make sure it would work, he sent his plans to a Dutch shipbuilder who mocked up a scale model and ran some tests. Apparently this thing was feasible and it could work, according to this Dutchman by the name of Bruno Tiedemann, and I'm convinced he was just having a laugh. This ship could reach its intended speed of 14 knots easily, and provided it had at least 8,500 horsepower, a full 8,100 more than the first Livadia that potted along at 13 knots. Given that this was for the Tsar and not for the Navy or, anything unimportant like the people, Popov went searching for the very best shipyards to get this job done. As summer rolled around in 1879, the design was sent to the chosen shipyard of John Elder & Co. and its master shipbuilder Sir William Pearce. John Elder & Co., as it was known at the time, was a world-renowned builder of extremely fine ships, both military and civilian. Eventually, alongside Livadia, this company would be able to account for ships such as the ocean liner Empress of Ireland, the battlecruiser HMS Renown, amongst others, and many others for all their creations. Pierce seemed to be up for the challenge and greatly interested in building something a little different, agreeing as to essentially hand over the ship for free if the final product didn't reach the required 14 knots. Betting that for the price, of a hefty bonus mind you, he could get the thing up to 15 knots. Pierce would actually build his very own steam engines for this express purpose. Eventually somebody in the British press noticed exactly what was being built and they assumed this was going to be the ultimate testbed for a new breed of Russian mega warships. Oh god, how wrong they were. This is why we eat spoons of salt with the press every time they talk about boats, because they tried to panic about this thing without stopping to think what happens when it hits a wave. The Livadia finally launched on the 7th of July 1880 in front of a massive crowd numbering up to and possibly over 10,000 people, with the Grand Duke Alexei in attendance for this momentous occasion. As she settled in the water, her draft was revealed at long last to be a mere 2.1 metres, which is only slightly taller than me. A disturbingly shallow draft for a ship so large. The ship by all accounts was incredibly well built though, to her design, and exceedingly modern, boasting 23 different engines for everything from water supply, power steering, and more. The ship was such a spectacle that there was actually a poem written about it by Algernon Swinburne that went, "And fear at hand for pilot oversea, with death for compass and despair for star, the white foam a shroud for the white Tsar." In the business, we call this foreshadowing. As the Livadia neared completion, life in Russia was becoming increasingly unhealthy for anyone going by the name of Tsar, and the rumour mill spread that the terrorist groups were going to secretly make their way to England to blow up their new yacht. What, you thought the insanity of random Japanese torpedo boats showing up randomly in Britain was the first and only time the Russians went psych with a naval-related rumour? Apparently, as the rumour went, the terrorists were on their way to plant nitroglycerin in the engines on an elaborate time fuse that when it came to the ship being fully loaded with coal, it would detonate. The Glasgow Herald reported these rumours to the head of the local police and extensive checks were undertaken, but shockingly, the terror groups from the middle of nowhere in Russia didn't make their way to Scotland in an elaborate plan to blow up a ship. But don't worry, the Livadia still had an explosion, it was just that it was a pressure test gone wrong and not some elaborate plot. Despite these setbacks, real or imagined, the ship completed on time and on the 24th of September 1880, Pierce himself steered the Livadia from Govan to Greenock. It was noticed during her trials that she wasn't the most manoeuvrable, which, you know, shocking considering it's a giant oval with a flat bottom. But what was really impressive was that during her trials the ship didn't just reach 14 knots, but 15 whole knots. A small trick was discovered during these sea trials that directed and combated the steering issues, and it is only what I can describe as a handbrake turn. The ship would accelerate as fast as possible, and then with half its propellers on any given side, it would cut all of those engines, turning quite literally like a spinning top and drifting until they fired them up again and kept going. They just needed to make sure to engage them again. As Jeremy Clarkson would say, that gets the ladies. On the 30th of September, the Russian crew boarded the ship and raised the Russian flag for the first time. Her captain, Ippolit Vogak, was probably the most experienced person in the world to command the thing, having previously commanded the other two circular ships. The shipyard was paid extra for their work, and the Russian crew set off home. And that was where the problems began. The Livadia set off on her first task, to pick up the General Admiral Grand Duke Constantine, yeah that's a title, who was on an important mission aka booze cruise to France at the time. A couple of days later at sea, the Grand Admiral Grand Duke had the great idea that in order to test the quality of the new ship, he should sail it directly into a storm. So he did. Now when I say storm, I mean storm because the waves were breaking well over the bows at around 8 to 10 meters while bracketing the side of the ship. In a way, the design actually helped here because she was incredibly stable and barely rolled. One catch though, she had a giant flat bottom. So when it went over the waves and slammed back down, it sounded like the hull was cracking from the impact like a giant belly flop. Every time it happened, according to the captain, it sounded like the ship was smacking into a giant rock. As the storm hit its second day, the crew found that the hull had in fact cracked, and the gap between inner and outer hull was full of water. At risk of literally sinking a couple weeks out of the dock due to the risk of hitting a wave at sea, the ship rushed into a safe harbour in Ferrol, Spain. It was in Ferrol that the crew found giant dents and cracks of up to 5 meters long in the hull, with 6 of the compartments full to the brim with water. Popov admitted that he failed to predict this would happen, and in typical Russian officer fashion, the admiral proceeded to blame the entire problem on the shipyard for not predicting it for him, ignoring the fact that it was a giant shallow half draft Roomba which the Grand Admiral Grand Duke ordered into a storm for funsies. Go Russia! The ship needed repairs, but it was quickly discovered that it was too wide to fit in any dockyard. Because the funds hadn't yet been appropriated to expand the Mykolaiv dockyard, the dockyard that was supposed to build the thing and to accommodate the Livadia, so the ship had no choice but to sit in Spain for 7 months, while the world's media took the chance to mock it relentlessly for being a giant white elephant, because it was. Vice Admiral Ivan Shestakov was sent to the rescue, and he very gently piloted the ship to Sevastopol, actively avoiding waves as best he could across the Mediterranean. Because God forbid you hit a wave at sea, it may sink your entire vessel. He himself reported that the ship's build quality was fantastic, but he advised against using it as a royal yacht due to the risk of suddenly sinking when banging into any waves. It was all a bit academic though, because for the Livadia, her career was over before it began. On the 13th of March 1881, the Tsar was murdered, and his successor Alexander III had more pressing issues to deal with other than an oval-shaped yacht that couldn't go anywhere. Not that it would matter anyway, because Alexander III had so little faith in his navy that he delegated all naval affairs to his younger brother, who completely disavowed Popov, calling him a waste of money and time, and lambasting how much money he had actually spent on his ships. On the 10th of June 1881, the Livadia set off for what would be her final voyage from Yalta to Batumi with royalty aboard. But again, on this voyage there were shockingly waves, and every wave that hit the ship made the superstructure shudder, terrifying everyone on board. After the voyage, the ship was inspected and recommendations were made to reinforce the hull, but some genius in the Department of the Navy decided that the solution was instead to run high-speed trials on the ship, 136 of them in fact, where they found that the ship could no longer reach 15 knots, and clearly that was the fault of the Scottish, never mind the fact that they started using crap quality coal. On August the 27th, the decision was made to end the glorified houseboat's career, and her fittings were removed and she was now referred to as a former royal yacht. The Tsar then had the idea to turn the ship into a floating prison, 1700 style, and so annoyed was the royal court that they went after Popov for fraud and embezzlement, prosecuting the man for a whole 4 years. Plans for the prison fell through though, and in 1883 the ship was renamed Experiment or Test, depending on your translation, and left to rot. Her extremely high quality engines were taken out and installed on the warships Minin, General Admiral, and Duke of Edinburgh. Yeah, that last bit, the ship built in Scotland had its Scottish engines taken out and installed on a ship named after a Scottish title. The reasoning why was that the current Duke of Edinburgh was at the time married to a Romanov, so that's the reason for the name, but I find that a little interesting anecdote. The ship's hulk would be intermittently used as a barracks and storehouse before in 1913 being recommissioned for port duties. The Soviets would take ownership of the giant floating hulk and she would be struck from the register finally in 1926, but was still floating around somehow in 1930, barely recognisable. The Livadia actually had an impact on the future though, far more impressive than her career, because her whole compartment layout really did influence the development of torpedo bulges. But that's it. That's the forgotten Popov. There is nothing more to it. It was quite literally a floating Roomba that broke itself because it ran into a wave at sea. Running into a wave in the ocean. Totally unheard of. Either way, thank you again to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Check them out, link again in the pinned comment and the description. And thank you all again for subscribing, liking, and commenting. We are well on track to hit 100,000 subscribers by the 1st of May, so let's keep that going, and yeah, I will catch you all next time.